All right, good morning, everyone. Archiman, let's begin the second lesson, which today is going to be on ritual and rites of passage. So, ritual exists on a continuum of action and behavior. And you can see that on this axis, the vertical axis has effort, low effort to high effort, and the horizontal axis is an axis of consciousness from low consciousness to high consciousness. And habit, which would include addiction, would be low effort, low consciousness. Routine falls in the middle, right? You have to put some effort and thought into a routine if it's going to be consistent, or even just getting up in the morning, getting yourself ready for the day, uh, getting yourself out the door for whatever you have to do takes some effort. Otherwise, you walk out with one slipper on and your hair a mess and sleep in your eyes and what have you. So you have to think through that. And then at the high end of both effort and consciousness is a category of behavior we call ritual. So what is ritual? A ritual, I'm just going to read this, you can read along with me. Ritual is the intentional performance of a set of actions. The actions often include movement as well as vocalization, anything we do with our voice, speech, chant, or song. The actions are usually repeated at regular intervals for the purpose of bringing meaning and a sense of order to your life. Rituals often express and reinforce the values and beliefs of an individual or of a community. Okay, so let's just focus for a moment on the word performance, right? We are acting. A ritual involves acts. So when we talk about theater, of course, we talk about performance and we talk about acting, but we act in everyday life. So a ritual is something that to some degree, whether it was a conscious rehearsal or not, is rehearsed, and it might just be rehearsed from the time you're a child and your family or your community undertakes these actions and behaviors regularly over time, and you sort of by osmosis, sort of unconsciously absorb the performance and eventually are able to perform. So if we think of this on a grid, again, on one axis, vertical, we have at the top sacred, infused with spirit, or what we might think of as spirituality, and at the bottom, secular, not more of the world. Okay. And on the horizontal, private to public. Right. So you can see in each of the quadrants of this pie, one quadrant is private and sacred, would include your private daily prayer or meditation, perhaps. Can you think if you can think of other examples? What else might be a private and sacred ritual that people perform? Uh, Moving to the right, public and sacred, right? So um, a pilgrimage um, to Mecca, perhaps, or to Jerusalem, or to Bethlehem, depending on your religious belief, or just a religious service, going to mosque or church or synagogue um, each week, right? And you can see, so on the private sacred, those two might be daily, they're regularly repeated intervals. Um, Pilgrimage happens annually, most likely, religious service weekly. Moving down to the bottom left, private and secular, more of the world. Waking up in the morning, maybe making a cup of tea and sitting down with your special book and journaling your thoughts and feelings as you begin the day. or perhaps undertaking an artistic practice, right? Like I'm a singer, so um, I try once a day to set aside time for intentional vocal work that I do. And to me, that is a ritual. I am very intentional about it. I make sure to take time away from my family so that I can have that time by myself. And then finally, over the right bottom, public and secular, right? Getting together with your family on Sundays, have a big spaghetti and meatball dinner. Um, I had said when we were together in class, something like the Super Bowl, which happens every year. People get together and look forward to eating and drinking too much and probably watching a boring game most often. Or if every 4 years we have the Olympics. Doesn't seem as big a deal these days, but I know when I was a kid growing up, we all looked forward to gathering around the TV every 4 years for a couple of weeks and watching that, and then voting. Every year or every 4 years, we have the opportunity as a public ritual to vote. So what's a rite of passage then? So a rite of passage is all of these things, this regularly repeated ritual, but with a specialized purpose. And the special purpose or function of a rite of passage is to support human beings through major life stage transitions. And upon successful completion of a rite of passage, an individual arrives at a new social and or spiritual state of being. And in pre-modern cultures, there would be no difference between the social and the spiritual. Everything was infused with spirit. And I write a little bit about that in the chapter that I shared with everyone. What's important to say? Well, lots of things important to say, but one thing I do want to say about rite of passage is these are ancient human tools. And not only is it believed that these are incredibly important psychologically for human beings, but we can see the results. We can see the importance through the absence of rites of passage. We live in a culture where rites of passage are not as common, not as commonly facilitated. And so, I think we as men can all attest to the fact that there are very few positive rights for boys to become men. So let's talk about just what it means to undertake a rite of passage. So this is a traditional framework for a rite of passage, and the traditional framework exists in three parts. You can see here they're labeled separation, liminality, and incorporation. Let's just focus in on number two for a second and talk about liminality. So the word limen, 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 is a Latin word that means threshold. Okay. So the threshold is the central part within a rite of passage. We're existing by and large in a threshold space. So some people would call one preliminal and number three postliminal, which even further emphasizes the importance of that limen, of that threshold space. So you can see very clearly on this diagram that you're existing. If you look at that bowl-shaped figure, you're existing as your old self to begin, right? You're just going about your life as you know it. But at some point, that first line right here is crossed. Something happens that separates you from your old self. If we're thinking about the rite of passage that might lead to marriage, for example, that threshold from old self into liminality maybe is engagement, right? You get engaged and suddenly you're not single anymore, but you're not yet to the new self, which is a married person. So for some period of time, you're living in, as you can see here, betwixt and between. It's a phrase you'll hear often when you're reading about rites of passage. You're in between. Um, and that's a very fertile um, place to be. Um, y- Possibilities are enormous. How you become the new self, what kind of new self you become, is sort of formed in this middle liminal space. So in the liminal space, so actually let's see. So here's some examples of liminal space. Okay. Um, I'll start up on the upper right. Many of you, I'm sure, know at least one of the men in that picture. That's just our ritual for return workshop. Um, Down below, beneath those guys, is a young boy working with a rabbi. You can't see the Torah they're working from, but they're preparing for that boy's bar mitzvah, which is the Jewish uh, boyhood to manhood, right? And then the big picture on the left seems pretty obvious, but another elder working with a boy in a tribal boyhood to manhood, right? So in each of these cases, so for ritual for return in that workshop, right, what we're saying is um, you are out of prison, but there's some work to be done in feeling fully free, not just physically free, but emotionally and psychologically free. So we're in this liminal space where we're preparing to reintroduce ourselves to our families and communities as the new self, not as the person who left for prison, but as the person who has transformed within prison and is now preparing to be re-embraced by the community. Um, in the other two images, the boyhood to manhood rites, of course, those boys are learning from elders. I mean, I guess in the R4R, I would be considered an elder in some way. And and Salim in our group, who's joining us, he's actually a more appropriate elder in this group because he's gone through the ritual and has lived the same kinds of experiences that you've lived. So, as someone helping to prepare you for this reintroduction, both of us are working in that role. And in those other two images here, you have the rabbi and maybe the shaman or medicine man working to prepare the boys for their transitions. All right, so um, back to the space. So one of the things that's interesting about liminality in traditional rites of passage is that people are considered to have actually no identity. You'll often see masks or you'll see people in white, their faces painted with some kind of ash or white paint, and they look kind of ghostly. And really, in this liminal space, traditionally people are considered to be in kind of a spirit world where they don't have a fixed identity. And again, without a fixed identity, on one hand, it's scary because, of course, as human beings, we like stability and security. And in this space, it's not there. It is a little bit scary to not know what it looks like to become the new self. And also, you're being often in rites of passage put through ordeals, and you already see that in our work together, right? That experience of going outside of your comfort zone, of being asked to step up to challenges that feel new and uncomfortable. That's part of a rite of passage. You're growing by pushing yourself to the edge and beyond your comfort zone. Um, but as scary as it is, it's also right with possibility and that spiritual opening. There's permission when you don't have a fixed identity to explore and to experiment with identities before you settle. So it's a really unique space to be in, and we don't get many of them in our lifetime. So um, yeah, it's an interesting thing to take advantage of. And then that other line you see um, is sometimes, as in our case, kind of a literal. Well, sometimes it's a literal line, like we did a couple of weeks ago, where we stepped across that tape that was put on the floor to make the commitment into this ritual for return process. But the threshold is always an act. You must act. It's sort of like saying, if you want to be this new thing, um, if you are making this assertion that you've become something new, you have to perform an action, a sort of demonstration of the new self. And so there are many ways that that can happen. If we look at a tribal ritual, let's break down a couple of things. So there, in that liminal space, you're learning uh, something that you're going to bring back to the community to demonstrate your worthiness and readiness to step into the new identity. I actually don't know what this ritual is. This is just an image I found online. But what I want to point out, I'm going to show you a couple of different examples of ritual, is that you have people performing. I want you to notice that in a rite of passage, there are theatrical dimensions to it, aesthetic dimensions, right? So this isn't a play, this isn't a theater, and yet you can see that it's very theatrical. They are wearing costumes. This doesn't look like the typical things that they would wear every day, right? They have special skirts and headdresses. The people in the circle are also wearing headdresses. There's sort of an elevated sense of things. Obviously, the fire in the middle. And then there are performers and there are witnesses, but that line is not totally clear, because it looks as though the witnesses are also pretty actively engaged in what's happening, right? They're not sitting back with a bag of popcorn just watching the performance. They're on their feet and they seem invested in what's happening. So it's important to note that a rite of passage, unlike many rituals, is a communal experience, at least an experience that is witnessed by um, one or more people, at least one person, right? You because you're performing a new identity, and identity doesn't have much meaning outside of the context of the social, right? What does an identity mean if there's no one else around? If you're the only person on earth, what does it mean to be black or white or man or woman? There's no context to compare yourself to anything else. You just are. And so a rite of passage is a social ritual that involves manifesting and performing a new identity. Let's look at rituals, rites of passage that we may be more familiar with. All right, so very different kind of um, aesthetic setting. Now, when I say aesthetic, I'm talking about the arrangement of um, variables. Um, I don't know how I'm trying to think how else to say it, but the arrangement of elements, let's say. So, um, how things are placed and what they communicate. So, just like in the traditional rite we just looked at, here too, there are costumes, right? This is not a play, and yet everyone has picked out a special costume for the day. One thing that we can see here clearly that we couldn't see clearly in the last image around the fire is that this guy in the middle is an officiant. He's officiating this rite of passage, and he's kind of playing the master of ceremonies and shepherding the couple through the process. And even today in religious institutions, I think there's a movement getting back to more traditional matrimonial rites, marriage rites, where that guy might have worked with this couple for some months preparing them for this threshold crossing. So this really is the threshold crossing, this part of the rite of passage. And again, just like in the other ritual we just looked at, there are witnesses and they seem invested in what's happening, right? They're not just sitting back, relaxing and enjoying the show. They're on their feet and bearing witness to the performance of this couple. And it looks like maybe right now one of them is putting a ring. They're both looking down at their hands. Maybe he's putting a ring on her finger, or she's putting a ring on his finger. But again, they have to do something to cross that threshold without saying a commitment vow and placing a ring on the finger or something else in a different culture that they've come up with. In the eyes of the witnesses, what's really happened. So again, there's a performance, and you can just see the beauty of the whole space. Everything is elevated to draw attention to this special event. So let's look at something very different. Again, very different setting, and yet some things that are similar. So here it's a good moment to mention. We think of rites of passage as being elevation rituals, right? We're moving from a lower state to a higher state. But here's a rite of passage that's a degrading rite of passage, right? It's degrading the person from citizen to a lower status, right? Convict, felon, prisoner, outcast, perhaps a number. And we have the officiant, right? Just like the priest or the shaman, he's the respected public official who's announcing, just like the priest in our last image, right? That at the end of this ritual, the priest will say, I now pronounce you man and wife. This guy's going to say, you are hereby sentenced to X number of years at the Douglas County Prison. And again, we have witnesses on their feet, clearly invested in the proceedings. Now, the aesthetics of this room, well, I'll just mention one other thing. Everyone's in a costume, right? We have maybe the lawyers here in their, I'm guessing, pantsuits. Judge has a special robe on. The prisoners have their orange jumpsuits on. We see even labeled here, the sheriff. The rest of the aesthetics, pretty drab, pretty boring, wood paneling, a limp American flag, a coffee heater over here, kind of coffee warming pot, some hand sanitizer over here. So it doesn't matter whether it's boring or exciting. It does communicate something, right? There's a certain feeling that one gets in this courtroom that's different from what you get in this courtroom. All of the aesthetics point up in this kind of Gothic cathedral, right? Everything's elevated. Even they're up on a set of stairs, and the audience are a couple of steps below. So we're looking up to the main theatrical event here. In this case, the judge is on a higher level, looking down and out. He's separated from the people that he's sentencing and speaking to, and this communicates something different. Let me just stop sharing for 1 second. Actually, let me log there. We'll go back to this real quick. Yeah, I forgot that I had this slide. So this is a quote from 1962 from a sociologist named Kai Erikson talking about why rites of passage for reentry, right? And this, of course, is before American mass incarceration even really begins. And he's speaking about what happens when someone is punished, but then brought back to the community without the benefit of a ritual or a rite of passage. So he says the offender is ushered into the special position, right? The special position is the new identity. He's brought into being a criminal, or let's say convict, by a decisive and dramatic ceremony, right? It's talking about the whole courtroom proceeding. You can even start with the Miranda rights all the way through sentencing. The whole thing is decisive and dramatic. Yet he's retired from that special position. He's brought out of that special position, right? Freed back into the world without hardly a word of public notice, right? So when you become a prisoner, that's decisive, dramatic, and public, right? But when you come out, hardly anyone says a thing, certainly not publicly. Maybe in your family, maybe in your community, but not publicly. No one says John Smith has hereby fulfilled the terms of the sentence agreed to with the state, and we hereby welcome him back into the community. So what's the result of this? Well, the result now, sorry about the 1962 language here, the deviant, but we can just use that literally, someone who is deviated from the laws of the community. The deviant returns home with no proper license to resume a normal life in the community. From a ritual point of view, nothing has happened to cancel out the stigmas imposed on him by his earlier commitment ceremony, the earlier decisive and dramatic ceremony. So what happens? The original verdict is still formally in effect. So does this make sense? It's like, because rites of passage are so powerful, because they're so deeply embedded in our DNA, when one goes through a rite of passage and assumes a new identity, it's almost as if it takes an antidote, a ritual antidote, to undo that identity and allow someone to take up a new one. I was talking to someone recently about marriage and divorce, right? The marriage ritual is so powerful. We invite all our friends and our family, and we have all of the trappings. We spend a lot of money, and we point toward this day. And on the other side of this, there's a huge party celebrating the union of these two people. But when you get divorced, there can be a level of shame. It can be contentious and often very private. It's happening between two people and their lawyers, and you're haggling over the division of property and children, and no one's making a big public announcement that they're now divorced. I mean, some people do, but you understand what I'm saying. And so I was just talking to my friend who is divorced about what a kind of odd and liminal space they continue to be in, because they have to kind of let people know as they meet them, oh yeah, no, I'm not married anymore. And so without this antidote of a rite of passage, listen, you'd have to tell me, what does it feel like to have been convicted, to have lived a life as a prisoner for years and even decades, and then to come home and not have that counter ritual that lets the public know that not only are you back, but you've paid the fine imposed upon you, and you're welcomed home. What does that do to you? And so that brings us to what we do, which is the antidote, which is the counter ritual. You guys might know Talib. So on the left picture, he is surrounded by friends and family, and he is speaking the vows that he wrote that will allow him to come back into the community as the person that he has become over the years, during and since his incarceration. You can see the emotion on the witnesses' faces, listening to him recite his vows. Now, notice his mask. He's still in a liminal space betwixt and between identities. In our ritual, you keep that mask on the almost the entire ritual, and you never speak your name until the very end here, right? And that's to symbolize this betwixt and between identity. You're not who you were. You're not who you're becoming, and so you don't have an identity. And we just keep your name out of the ritual, and we don't let the audience, the witnesses, see your face. And it makes for a very dramatic ritual at the end here. So at the top right, Talib is preparing to finally take off his mask. And the words that he says at the very end of his vows are something to the effect of, I'm happy or I'm proud to reintroduce myself to my family, to my friends, and to my community. My name is, and then he says his name. And then, of course, you can see the kind of cathartic release once his mask is off. Everyone gets to see him for the first time that evening, and they literally embrace him and welcome him back to the community. So that is the first overview of rites of passage. I hope that was informative and useful, and I'll be interested to hear if people have any thoughts about rites of passage, about what we're doing, any questions that you might have. I'm happy to answer them, of course, or have a little discussion when we're together in our next session. But that's going to do it for today, and talk to you guys soon. Arkman.